How's everybody doing this morning? Josh and I got lucky. We got the sort of pre-lunch coffee hitting its maximum point in the talk, so hopefully the caffeine stays strong for another few minutes. I'm Micheal Shea. I am Heal Utah's Senior Policy Associate. I primarily work in the energy sector, encouraging the development of renewables in the state and advocating for the early retirement of Utah's coal resources. So for all intents and purposes, given the nature of this symposium, I'm sort of treating democracy and the idea of democracy as the idea of choice. And in that spirit, I'm going to offer you fine people a choice. Would you guys like the good news or the bad news first? Bad news, okay. The bad news is, like Josh was kind of talking about, is the energy sector and the energy industry is a very institutionalized dinosaur, basically, that has a very traditional way of thinking about how to develop, generate, transmit, and distribute energy. And that comes in the form of burning fossil fuels in large power plants hundreds of miles away from a city and then pumping that power into a urban area that is then consumed and then paid for. And that's a business model. It's traditionally based on a balance of market forces and regulated forces, and that's how it's been done. It's been done for almost since the advent of electricity. In fact, that traditional model was battled over between Tesla and Edison, with Tesla advocating more of a distributed generation, and then Edison advocating for your sort of large-scale power plant model. And Edison won that battle. That is how electricity is delivered in the United States and around the world today. So now the good news. Speaking of market forces, I can say completely honestly and with a straight face that utility scale wind and solar are matching, if not beating, traditional fossil fuel generated sources in a market energy environment. That megawatt hour, the calculation of the price that energy is paid for is matching natural gas, which is amazing and which is a great thing. And it just shows how far renewables have come. Now the problem is you still have a very institutionalized way of thinking about energy. And so the question for the symposium and for communities and states and the country in general is, how do we provide choice in the marketplace now? Because now it's no longer about subsidizing rooftop solar. It's no longer about subsidizing wind. It's about how do you provide access for communities and for states, for individuals, to be able to take advantage of these low prices. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how you do it on a macro scale, so states and cities, even regions, and then a little bit on the micro scale in terms of rooftop solar. So as Josh mentioned, we have what's called a regulated monopoly utility in the state of Utah, which is Rocky Mountain Power, which is a subsidiary of a company called Pacificor, which is a subsidiary of a company called Berkshire Hathaway Energy, which is a subsidiary of the fourth largest company on the planet, Berkshire Hathaway. So not much choice there. They pretty much decide how our energy is generated, how it's transmitted, and how it is used. And their big argument is that we can provide the lowest price of electricity possible. But as I just mentioned, that's no longer the case. We've actually taken away that argument from them. And so now it's about how do you allow access to these low-priced renewable sources of energy. And one of the ways you do it, and then this might be sort of counterintuitive given that Trump is saying deregulate the energy industry, is we actually do. We do want to deregulate the energy industry within the state. Or I should say re-regulate or transfer the regulation. You basically want to create what's called an EIM, or an energy imbalance market. And this is essentially exactly as it sounds. It's an energy market where cities and towns or states can go and say, okay, we want to buy our energy from this specific source. They have the option to pay more for that source. They have the option to pay less for that source. But the point is, the option is there. And so it's an amazing thing, but obviously there are complications. Again, renewable sources are still intermittent. That challenge needs to be overcome through a variety of ways. One of them is called a integrated system operator. And basically we want to think of the grid as more of a network. The traditional grid, you just push power in one direction until it gets to your home, and you're constantly pushing more of it. You got to think of energy as like water that you can't store. It's constantly flowing. What we want to do is use capital assets to create a network system where you can move power instantaneously, because it moves at the speed of light, to one area or another. So when you have California, who's producing thousands of excess megawatts of rooftop solar, you can actually push that to areas that need more power in Utah or Idaho or Oregon, where the sun isn't shining. And so you want to be able to create a marketplace where that energy can move around, and then create a regulatory system to encourage the further development of renewable energy, and create essentially paradigms that show the benefits through market pricing of renewables, and then increase the cost of fossil fuel generation to reflect the environmental externalities of generating that electricity. So that's kind of on a macro scale. You want to be able to give cities and states the choice, an energy choice, easily and efficiently. On a local scale, we want to do, has anybody heard the term microgrids? It seems to be all the rage these days, yes. So a microgrid is essentially a grid system within a community, whereby the community has much more freedom to make energy choices about how it generates and uses energy. A true microgrid is still connected to the larger grid, but again, it allows that energy freedom, and so it would make it much easier for Salt Lake to reach its renewable energy goals. It would make much easier for individual communities within cities to reach their renewable energy goals. And so one important component of microgrids is rooftop solar. And it really is a pretty cool technology. I'm going to give you a kind of a little rundown of where we are in Utah with rooftop solar at the moment. So Utah has been enjoying quite the increase of rooftop solar energy. It's great, it's wonderful, but with that drastic increase of adoption, we've started seeing pushback from Rocky Mountain Power, because in the end, rooftop solar is competition for them. If you are generating your own electricity, you are not paying the utility as much, because that's how they make money. You pay them for your electricity use. Within that percentage, or within that price, is a certain percentage of profit that they use to continue their business model. So if you are if you are using less electricity, then that is a form of competition. And they don't like competition, especially in a regulated marketplace where they've kind of been the only cat in town for almost 100 years now. And so what's happening at this moment? So Rocky Mountain Power has proposed to make rooftop solar more expensive, in their view, to reflect the true cost of delivering that electricity. Their point is that rooftop solar customers aren't paying their fair share of what are called fixed costs. And so these are the costs of grid maintenance, the utility poles, the wires, the workers. All that goes into, if people are familiar with their electricity bills, it's that customer charge that everybody gets. In Utah, it's about $6. So and again, this is coming from the utility, and this is their perspective. in order for rooftop solar customers to pay their fair share, they're proposing basically a three-part rate structure to increase the cost of using rooftop solar. The first is increasing that customer charge from $6 to $15. The second is to reduce the compensation rate at which rooftop solar customers get compensated for the electricity they produce through net metering. So this is when you're pushing power back onto the grid. You have excess electricity. Your panels are producing excess electricity. And so when you push that power back into the grid, you compensated for that at what's called the retail rate, which is around 11 cents a kilowatt hour. They want to reduce that to about 3 cents, 3.50 a kilowatt hour. So it's a dramatic reduction. And then the final one, and probably the most complicated, is called the demand charge. And essentially this is used to recoup the cost of producing electricity during what's called peak demand periods. So this is like from about 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Everybody comes home, they turn on all their electronics, they turn on their AC, and power spikes. And so the demand charge essentially is a per kilowatt charge of $9, which depending on your electricity use, depending on how much you have happening at your house, that can be in the excess of $30, $40, $50 a month, which drastically makes the payback period of rooftop solar much more expensive. And so if you think of rooftop solar, it's kind of like buying 10 years of electricity up front. So the longer it takes you to pay back your rooftop solar system, the less likely you're going to get to invest in it. And so for the past 6-7 months, we have been locked in negotiations, settlement discussions with the utility about the value of rooftop solar. And from our perspective, rooftop solar provides a value, and it's not just the ability to offset fossil fuel generation. It provides real grid and ratepayer values, and this is important to take away because you'll often, the number one argument you hear from everybody is the subsidy. Renewables are subsidies. And we've demonstrated on a market level, utility scale, wind and solar is no longer a subsidy. You cannot make that argument. But what these battles are playing out throughout the United States right now is rooftop solar is a subsidy, they'll tell you. You are not paying your fair share, you're being subsidized by other ratepayers. And so I think the important thing that I'd like everybody here to take away is it's not a subsidy. And I'll just run through the tangible, quantifiable benefits really quickly because I'm running out of time. The first is what's called transmission and distribution benefits. So when you generate power from a big power plant hundreds of miles away, you have to push that power through what's called high capacity power lines. Oh, I'm totally going to run out of time. Which costs money. And you lose a lot of that power in transmission in the form of heat. And you have to generate even more power using more fuel, which is more expensive. With rooftop solar, and this is truly one of the coolest things, is when you are generating excess power, you are actually pushing that power directly to your neighbors because electrons travel the path of least resistance. So you are providing your neighbors with clean energy at almost a 0% transmission loss rate. And that's real savings. And so that's the big one. And you talk to people about this, and you kind of see like the wheels turning in their head, and they're like, oh, I didn't think of that. And it works. It works with legislators. It works with people you're trying to convince about the technology. Another one is what's called defer capital costs. And so if you have enough rooftop solar, you can actually displace the need to build new power plants, whether they be thermogeneration or even utility scale renewables. People are investing their own capital to build this technology, and that is a benefit to other ratepayers and the grid in general. So there's a whole bunch more, but it gets very technical, and I'd be happy to talk sort of offline about them. But the point is this. renewables have reached a place where they're no longer a subsidy. And now it's just about choice. It's allowing communities and individuals and states and even our country to make a choice about, do we want to do it the traditional way, or do we want to do it in this new technological and soon to be even cheaper way? And that is how we try to frame the argument for skeptics, especially in Utah, where there's a lot of them. But thank you, and I'm officially out of time, but thank you. Yep.